Welcome to First Thought, a podcast by Galway International Arts Festival. I'm Tiernan Henry, host of the festival's Vinyl Hours. Vinyl Hours is a series of conversations with artists and creatives, tracing a musical journey through the soundtracks of their lives. Tom Waits reckons that songs are really just interesting things to be doing with the air. And here on Vinyl Hours, we think talking about them isn't too shabby either, even if it is only bravado. You can listen to the full playlists on Galway International Arts Festival's Spotify page. And if you like what you hear, please consider making a donation to Galway International Arts Festival, a non-profit organisation bringing the arts to people in Ireland and around the world. Head to giaf.ie and click Donate. Today's guest is Stephen Murtagh, a member of the hugely successful band The Academic. Originally from Rochford Bridge in Westmeath, Stephen and his brother Matthew formed the band with their friends Craig Fitzgerald and Dean Gavin in 2013. Their debut album, Tales from the Backseat, was released in 2018 and topped the Irish charts, and they've released a series of EPs and singles since the album was released. The band headlined the Heineken Big Top for the first time at Galway International Arts Festival in 2019, and The Academic will be back next year for the July 2022 festival. Tickets are available from giaf.ie. But for today, we're here to talk about some of the music that moves Stephen. So without further ado, enjoy Vinyl Hours with Stephen Murtagh. So Stephen, you're sending us on a journey through the past with this great playlist you've sent us. And remember, for everyone listening in, just check out the Spotify page on Galway International Arts Festival and you can listen to the music. So thank you for doing this.
Thank you very much for having me on. I'm very excited to be on, kind of talking about music like this, and it's an interesting way to think about music. I'd never really thought about the soundtrack of my life before, and kind of the songs that might have like defined certain years or moments in my life. So I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
Cool, great. Listen, well, should we jump right in? So your first song is "We Used to Wait." This is from Arcade Fire's Grammy Award-winning 2010 album, The Suburbs. And according to Win Butler, frontman of the band, the album it's a letter from the suburbs. That's essentially what they were aiming at. And most of it was recorded in his and Regine Chassang's home in Montreal. Then they did some more work in Quebec and in New York City. And I think he said, I read a great interview with him. He said what they were trying to do was get a mix of Depeche Mode and Neil Young the album, which is a fine way of talking about it, I think.
That kind of sums up the suburbs nicely, doesn't it? Yeah.
Exactly. So when they recorded the album, they said they wanted to get the sound of the bands that they heard when they were young and what all of those crazy noises were. So Stephen, Arcade Fire?
Yeah, massively important band for me. And there is a reason that I kind of wanted this to be the first song we talk about and the first song on the playlist. I suppose sometimes people talk about like musical awakenings, and Arcade Fire was like definitely my first one. My childhood and my early teenage years can be very kind of distinctly defined by two musical phases. One of them I still love and I'm still very fond of, and one of them not so much. So the first one was like lots of 60s pop, like Otis Redding, all the Phil Spector stuff, Wallace Sound, like the Ronettes, Beatles, Beach Boys, all that stuff. I loved it from a very early age and will till forever. And but the other phase that I was very much into was like UK kind of lad indie, kind of that brash Oasis, Arctic Monkeys, Libertines, and that was like from the ages of kind of like 8 to maybe like 14, 15, that was my kind of musical identity. But then I remember my cousin Jody, who's about 15 years older than me, he used to bring us down CDs, me and my brother Matthew, and we used to burn them onto our computer. Remember that?
Yes.
And I remember one day he brought down, I'm pretty sure the 3 albums were, it was like a Jamie T album. I can't remember the name of it. I think it was a Badly Drawn Boy record as well. But then he had Neon Bible. And this was before The Suburbs was out. Mm. And I remember hearing Neon Bible and just like getting obsessed and going down YouTube rabbit holes. Discovered Funeral. We used to then we started covering Rebellion in cover bands and stuff and I just completely kind of like it. Arcade Fire were the band that showed me that there was more to alternative music than what I was listening to. There was more to it than that kind of British Oasis, Arctic Monkeys thing. I still have a huge time for that. It's just I don't go out on my way to listen to that stuff anymore. But Arcade Fire was like the band that kind of led me to discover maybe like LCD Sound System, Interpol, Vampire Weekend, stuff that I would be more into. And then also one of the like the greatest indoor gig I've ever been to was the Three Arena in Dublin. Me and Matthew, my brother who's in the band, went up after we got obsessed with Arcade Fire. On the Suburbs tour, we got to see, it was an incredible lineup in the Three Arena. It was Arcade Fire headlining, Vampire Weekend were the first support, and Devendra Banhart was the next support. And it was a very special. I've seen Arcade Fire a couple of times, but like indoor, the enclosed atmosphere, that trilogy of perfect albums of Funeral, Into Neon Bible, Into the Suburbs. I remember very, very clearly they played My Body is a Cage, which they never play live. And I just, every so often in your life, you get like a live music moment where you're just like, wow, I will never, ever forget this.
Yeah.
And that was mine. And the way they have like 1 million people on stage. I remember the guy who like, I think he's a butler as well. He was running around with like a rack tom or a snare, and he was swinging it around his neck, and it hit him in the face, and there was blood all down his face, and he just kept performing and kept
going.
Performing.
Yep.
It was a very, very important band for me in kind of like shaping my musical life, I suppose.
Yeah. And I think what's one thing I really like about them as well is I think they're such a good band, just as a band, and the albums all sounded great, but as well, they could do it live. And when you see them on stage, as you say, like there's 10, 12 of them, I don't know how many people there are on stage. And it's hard to keep up with them because they all play loads of different instruments, so they're jumping around from guitars to accordions to, run around with drums and things. And yet it never feels cluttered. It doesn't feel showy, like, oh, look what we can do. It just works for the music so much,
That's it never feels showy, but it also never feels pretentious. That they can release an album like The Suburbs, which is like kind of like a concept album about like, even take that song that I've picked, We Used to Wait in particular. I suppose he's talking about like technology moving at an unsustainable kind of rate and how we're losing kind of the magic and the romance of that human interaction. They can do stuff like that and have it come across as genuine because that is who they are. And it never seems, and it also, it's not preachy. It's not like them saying, "Oh, everything was better before, and now things are terrible." It's kind of like it's a very romantic and nuanced look at kind of how society is changing. And even that line was in We Used to Wait. It's now our lives are changing fast, and everything's speeding up, and the strings building, and the drums are building, and it gets more intense and more intense, and I love that band to bits.
Yeah. And the thing as well I like about them is they seem to really enjoy being on stage. I know some of the songs are quite intense and so on, but I think you're right. There's a great romance about them. I think they love playing live. It's really obvious from that they love playing live and that they love interacting with the audience, and more than just, good evening, Dublin. It's great to be back in Ireland, or whatever. I mean, they actually just seem to really get off on getting the audience off as well, which is, Do
you know what's strange as well? They can be a band who are thematically can be very heavy. They're like, even like Funeral's a heavy album, and Parts of Neon Bible, like My Body is a Cage and stuff, is heavy as well. And the entirety of The Suburbs kind of has this like mist over it, but yet their live performances are so joyous. Yeah. And it seems so like communal. I don't know if that's like a family thing because there's a good few butlers on stage, and so. But it's incredible how kind of celebratory and joyous their live performances can be for a band who would. I mean, I'm sure people who aren't fans of Arcade Fire would probably like accuse them of being like depressing, and yet their live gigs are so incredibly filled with joy.
They are joyous, aren't they? And so listen, we're going to change pace slightly, I suppose, in a way, going back to 1967. And I think what's interesting with this, it's almost the piece that you've chosen. It's a Beatles track. But it's almost as complex as, what Arcade Fire were getting up to. And Arcade Fire had probably more tracks to play with. Because again, one of the things I read was the engineer who worked on The Suburbs said it was a horrible job to mix down all the tracks. He said some of the things had 30 or 40 tracks and, 3 drum kits, 8 guitars, And if you go back to 1967, this was the Beatles in Abbey Road. And what you've picked, it's a really interesting choice. I think it's Penny Lane that you've picked because it was recorded as a standalone single. So this was a double A side.
With Strawberry Fields, yeah.
Yeah. And when they recorded it, Revolver was out. They were getting ready to make their next album. And they put out a single because they had to. They were contractually obliged to put out a single. And then being the Beatles, they said, well, we can't put that in the album, when we do the album.
That's what's incredible to me. Even like before we get into Penny Lane, the fact that whenever these like greatest album conversations come up, the Beatles, like Revolver's always there, rightfully so, Abbey Road, Sgt. Pepper, and the singles were never on the albums. Yep. Like you said, like Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields was a double A side that kind of were recorded in the Sgt. Pepper sessions. Could you imagine adding Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields to already maybe the greatest album ever? It just and you can say that like what was Revolver had was a Paperback Writer and Rain, and was it like Day Tripper off Rubber Soul, and like it's crazy. All these singles weren't on the albums, and yet we still discuss these albums as rightfully so the greatest ever made. It's crazy.
Apparently, when they were recording this, McCartney wrote most of this one. So obviously it was Lennon McCartney, but this was one of McCartney's. But apparently when they were recording it, he was listening to Pet Sounds. Anytime they weren't recording, he was putting Pet Sounds on. And again, like I was saying, this was a contractually obligated single that they had to put out a single. And the engineers were talking about that what McCartney was trying to get was he was after this what he called a really clean American sound, which is what he was hearing on Pet Sounds. And I think what's really interesting, one of the things that's really interesting about this is that in this block of time, so Pet Sounds came out middle of 66, Dylan's Blonde and Blonde came out a month later or something. Revolver came out a month later, and then a year later the Beatles are making Sgt. Pepper, and in between they throw out this single. So tell us about Penny Lane, and what do you think?
Well, I'm sure when people do this like soundtrack their lives stuff and people include the Beatles, I'm sure there's people like rolling their eyes and being like, oh, another person including the Beatles or whatever, but it would genuinely be so fundamentally dishonest for me to not include a Beatles track. Like I said, that like the early phases of my life, like I grew up in a Beatles house. The only reason I can and the only reason I do play guitar is because of the little black book of Beatles. I'm looking at it right now. It's in bits. I learned to play. I remember doing like CD for the start of I Want to Hold Your Hand and learning like all the. That is the reason that I play music. So it would be extremely dishonest for me to not have a Beatles track in there. Penny Lane, I'm a McCartney man. I go through phases, but like I have mostly been a McCartney man for my entire life as a bass player, as someone who genuinely adores pop music and melodies. And look, it's just a little slice of his genius, isn't it? Like it paints such a kind of evocative picture of Liverpool in, I suppose, like the late 40s or the 50s or whenever he grew up there. And what I found as I get older, all my favorite pieces of art kind of have that kind of experiential thing where it's overwhelming to your senses, where like it paints such a strong picture of a place, a time, and that goes across music, movies as well. Like all my favorite movies have, and TV shows have that, where you feel like you're living in the place. It nearly stops becoming like a viewing experience and it becomes purely just an experience. It's like you're living in it, and that's what Penny Lane does to me. It just completely like takes me there. And I'm useless with music theory. I'm not like a clever person when it comes to music theory, but I think I know the music theory behind Penny Lane, and like it's insane. It's like the downwards key change going into the chorus. It starts in like B major and then goes to the parallel minor halfway through the verse, and that's how he can get down to A major for the choruses. Even like it's just like when you talk about like great composers of like kind of the modern era, if you're talking about like Gershwin or Cole Porter or whatever, like McCartney's there. He's there. There's no doubt about it. He was a genius. And like you said at the start, like that is that the best single ever put out, like the double A side of Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields. It perfectly shows the duality of that songwriting partnership of like, of Lennon and McCartney. It's like them both reflecting on areas of Liverpool. of their childhood in kind of both their distinct sounds, and they're both masterpieces in very different ways.
Yeah. One thing I really like about Penny Lane is that both of them talked about writing the lyric, and how the lyric essentially was, no, I did see that man. Yeah, I did pass that. You know, everything is literally observed. And it's, you know, Penny Lane is where there was a bus stop, I guess, that they both used when they were younger, you know, that the bus would go by it. So you think what they've done is they've picked these just purely mundane day-to-day observations. And then he's put it on this, as you said, it's this little mini symphony, which is just about 3 minutes long.
Yeah.
And you kind of think, 2 years before, it was C, D, G, you know, maybe one minor chord. And that, you know, and the transition, I think, for them, I suppose, to go from, you know, these really hard-working gigging musicians from the late 50s going into the early 60s, just to where they had a little bit more space to start exploring things.
Yeah.
And you're right. And I think where you get this, obviously having George Martin on board was probably quite useful as well. But this complexity of the music is more than, you know, this isn't an arranger or producer. This is all from McCartney. And I suppose being able to formulate probably what was going on in his head, you know, a sound he could hear in his head, but able to produce that is astonishing. And as you said, you know, these little transitions within the song, if you get to this point, but you need to get to a chorus, how do you do that? Well, this is how you do it, you know, and it's perfectly seamless. And of course, when you hear it, it sounds perfect. It sounds, yeah, that's exactly right.
It's one of his greatest bass lines as well. And that's like, that's a very hotly contested category, you know?
Yes.
And just like the way it descends down, but then sometimes the melody's going up. And the way he can sing about all these like mundane things, like you're saying, like the banker never wears a Mac, or the like the fire truck stuff, and make it so like genuine and childlike, kind of childlike, but like more nostalgic. And it's just it's just a little snippet of the genius of McCartney. Yeah.
And I suppose just, you know, for your next track, we're staying, you know, in the same broad era with three more geniuses, I think, you know, Hal David, Burt Bacharach, and Dionne Warwick. And what you've picked is, and I suppose this goes back to what you were saying at the start, it's just this gorgeous single, I Say a Little Prayer. In studio on the 9th of April, 1966. This is when you could go in one day and make a single like that. And apparently, again, Bacharach, when he worked with Dionne Warwick in this part of the sort of mid and early 60s, they said typically they'd only do 1 or 2 takes on any song, but they did 10 takes apparently on this song. And Bacharach said, I don't think we've gotten it.
They weren't even happy with it, were they? Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And then she said, no, it worked, you know, and then it's this monster of a hit. And he goes, oh, okay, maybe we did get it right.
Yeah.
know? So again, is this one of those songs that was just in the house when you were growing up?
Well, this one, if you put a gun to my head right now and you said, what's the greatest song ever written? I would say it's I Say a Little Prayer by Burt Bacharach and Hal David. That is my favorite song ever. So I did want to sneak it in. And I'm sure there's many people listening going like, yeah, but the Aretha Franklin version, the Aretha one is the version of that song. And they're right. They're probably right. But I wanted to include this song because Bacharach and David is like my favorite songwriting partnership. And I think so many of my favorite songs ever are Bacharach and David compositions. And Dionne Warwick, in my opinion, was the greatest singer of Bacharach and David compositions. I Say a Little Prayer, Walk On By, Do You Know the Way to San Jose? I'm sure there's a million more. There definitely is. But yeah, she was the perfect voice, and what an incredible voice, and what a performer. Even over the last few days, I've been watching her performance of that song on the Ed Sullivan Show, and it's breathtaking. She's just incredibly beautiful, and her voice is like soaring, and just it's an amazing song. And like you asked me, was this song like in the house when I was younger or anything? The way I think about Burt Bacharach and Hal David and their songwriting is, I can't remember the first time I heard any of their songs. It's like they've always just existed. And to me, that is like, the more I thought about it, I thought that was the perfect way to sum up their partnership. Like, can you remember the first time you heard like like Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head or like Close to You or no, of course you can't. They've just always existed. They've always been songs, and it's that like familiarity of their writing that kind of makes it so genius, while also being unbelievably complex. Like really tricky time signatures. Burt Bacharach, another genius composer in the same mold of Brian Wilson, McCartney, all them guys. It just like strange chord choices. I love them little tight brass sections that are in like all of his tracks. It was really tricky to just pick one Bacharach song. I could have done this entire podcast with only Bacharach songs. For years, I know I just said I think this is the greatest song ever written. For years, I thought Close to You by the Carpenters was the greatest song ever written, and you couldn't convince me otherwise. So the fact that didn't even make it in, or Walk On By didn't make it in, or some of the Dusty Springfield stuff, it's just a testament to how much I absolutely love him. And like, not just as a writer, like he produced it, he arranged it. It's like it's another bit of like absolutely terrifying genius, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think when he played at the festival in Galway 2 or 3 years ago. I can't remember, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. I can't quite remember now. And every single song, you went, "Oh yeah, that as well. Oh Jesus, that's another one of his." You know, and you kind of think of this was just whatever 90 minutes of a career squeezed into 90 minutes. It wasn't like, okay, I need to play the first song again because I've run out of songs. This was probably, how do we squeeze it down to 90 minutes? It always reminds me of that quote when Gershwin was in Paris, and Gershwin did a tour in Europe in the early 20s, and he met, I can't remember which one of the avant-garde composers, and your man played Gershwin a piece of this, this harmonious piece of music, and then Gershwin played him some of his, and he apologized. And your man says, "Don't apologize. Music is music. It's all music, And I think you're right. I think sometimes we overlook the things that seem to have been there all the time. And because they're so familiar, we kind of sometimes overlook just how good they are. Because, as you say, I can't remember.
I completely
That stuff
agree.
was just all, you grow up and it's always there. You turn on the radio and there's, at some point during the day, you'll hear one of those songs and you go, I don't own that album, but I know every word to that song. And everyone in the car knows every word to that song. And everyone in the shop or whatever it is knows the words to that song,
I remember a couple of years ago, I was watching a thing on BBC4, and the program was called Sings Bacharach and David, and I wanted to watch it because I was a fan at the time, and a song came on, and it was it's Cilla Black or someone, and it's like there is always someone there to remind me, you know that one, and I was like, oh, I don't know this song, and then 2 choruses in, I was like, yeah, I know this song. I don't know how I know this song, but I do, I absolutely do.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know I was also very tempted to include, This Guy's in Love with You by Herb Alpert, the great trumpet player.
Yeah.
And if I could sing at all, if I was any good of a singer, if you said I could only sing one song as like a party piece or a performance,
that's
piece,
your one. Yeah.
Oh, This Guy's in Love with You! What a song!
Yeah.
It's just so good. And I know I've spent a lot of time probably talking about Bacharach, but like Hal David as a lyricist. I think that the story behind I Say a Little Prayer was that he was writing it from the perspective of an American wife, as their husband was a soldier in Vietnam, and just kind of praying that he'd make it through the day and that she would too. And his deceptively simple lyrics that just like beat themselves into your frontal lobe and never ever leave.
Yeah, and you go back to exactly what you say. You hear one of these things on the radio, and you go, "Oh, I don't know this," and then you realize I do know it, and you're humming it or singing it, and you know what the next line is. And again, you think, "But I don't own this, so how do I know it?" And I think some of these songs have just become, sometimes I think with an album that you might be particularly close to, or, an artist you're particularly close to, you really like their stuff, and you immerse yourself in it. But I think what's really interesting as well, you'd definitely say about the Beatles, it seems to be cultural, that it seems to be the entire culture is immersed in this stuff.
Yeah.
Everyone knows these things without knowing how they quite know these things,
I would say that I Say a Little Prayer as a song, whether it's the Dionne Warwick version, the Aretha version, which it's ingrained in Western psyche. And that's the greatest thing you could possibly hope to achieve with a pop song, I think. That it's like, it doesn't matter where you are, it doesn't matter what age bracket you're with. when you put on that song, everyone's clicking along to it, and everyone knows the chorus, and everyone likes it. You're not going to meet someone who's like, no, not for me, not for me. It's like, what, you don't like Aretha Franklin? What is wrong with you?
Exactly. And I suppose one of the good things about it is it's a song of minding yourself, but it's a love song, and it takes us nicely, I suppose, in a way to your next track as well, because it's a change in pace in a way. But what's really interesting again about this is it's another love song, and it's from 1983, and it's Talking Heads. This Must Be the Place, naive melody. And David Byrne said it's a real honest kind of love song. I don't think I've ever done a real love song before. So we moved from the Beatles and Dionne Warwick right up into, I suppose, 1983 New York, which it really is. So why this?
Yeah, so if I said that Arcade Fire was my first kind of musical awakening, I think in my later teenage years, Talking Heads was the second and most important one. Massive influence on me as a musician, songwriter, human being. Lyrically, David Byrne's kind of vocal deliverance, and maybe most importantly, Tina Weymouth as a bass player, unbelievably underrated. And just like where do you even start with This Must Be the Place? It's a really rare one for Talking Heads, because so many of their songs you kind of associate with lyrically. There can be like anxiety or like even comedy sometimes, and to have just this completely pure love song, it's like what's rare is beautiful. I wish I had better Irish, actually. There's a great Irish turn of phrase for that's what's rare is beautiful, but I just don't have the Gaeilge. My apologies. But like just hugely influential as a song onto me. Like even the way the bass line, the synth bass plays over and over and over again. We have a song on our first record called Why Can't We Be Friends, where I just play the same bass line the whole way through the song, the verse, the chorus. It's the same chord run, just different dynamics. And that's completely what I was trying to do. I believe it or not, the version of This Must Be the Place from Stop Making Sense, I think is my most listened to song ever on Spotify.
Right, yeah.
And I try to watch Stop Making Sense at least once or twice a year, just to remind myself that's what live music is about to me. When I watch Stop Making Sense and I see again the joy, how innovative it is, how clever the music is without being pretentious, how brilliant they all are, how great they all look. To me, like that is live music, and that's what makes me want to do what I do. Yeah.
And I think it's interesting you bring back the Arcade Fire reference there in a way. And I think there's a couple of things, I suppose. One is I think sometimes people forget just how good a band Talking Heads were, that they weren't just David Byrne with some other musicians. No, that core of the four of them. Yep. You just think all of the things they brought are all of the things that made the band so good. And obviously then, they did, when they toured, particularly say with this album, did more musicians and so on because it was, part of the show and stuff. But I think it's really easy sometimes to forget that they were a band to start with. And this was when I was young, when I was a teenager, I suppose all of this stuff was coming out. And I remember the thing was like how icy and how clinical the early albums were. And then this one came along and you kind of think, is he singing? Is he actually singing something personal here? Yeah. As opposed to, something very cool and hip in New York. Here was something just a little bit more open, and you think, boy, there's humanity in there as well.
Yeah. It's very funny because everything on like Remain in Light is very paranoid and anxious.
Yeah.
And same with Fear Music. And is it more songs about building and food? Like there's comedy in the title of that album.
Yeah.
And then to have just like this pure love song, so rare. It kind of makes you hope that they did more of that, but just the fact that it's just this little snippet and that it, in my opinion, the greatest song kind of makes it worthwhile.
Yeah.
That it's just the one time they ever did it. I love the lyrics. I love the verses open and the home is where I want to be on both the verses. And I just something that really hits home with me is that idea of like home and it's a love song, and the idea that home isn't necessarily always a place. Home can be like the feeling that a person gives you. And I guess it just on a personal note, it kind of reminds me of like the relationship I have with my girlfriend and stuff. And it's just that idea of home not necessarily being a place has always kind of really hit home with me. And then I was lucky enough to see David Byrne on the American Utopia tour at a festival in Belgium. Holy moly. Holy moly. I don't know what else to say. That is the greatest show I've ever seen? It's up there. I mean, like, have you seen like the Spike Lee filmed version of
Yes.
American Utopia?
Yeah.
I love the bit in that, and I think it's before This Must Be the Place, where he says, basically he there came a point in his life where he realized that people would rather look at people than look at things. And just that idea to strip away all the backline, so it's just people and just the bare minimum of what they need. And we were playing at that festival in Belgium, and David Byrne was backstage with all his band, and I just sat at like a non-creepy distance, and I just watched him walk down the stairs with like all that incredible band, and it's so multicultural and just incredible musicians, and I just like watched them descend down the stairs and go over to their stage, and I went through the main gate and saw the show, and it was very emotional, and I love that man to bits. And like you said, Speaking in Tongues is my favorite Talking Heads album. It's got like Girlfriend Is Better and Burn Down the House.
Burning Down the House, yeah.
Slippery People. The fact that maybe it was the one right before Stop Making Sense as well makes me love it even more. I don't know why. Yeah. It's just like that was their new songs at the time.
I remember at the time, it's not that it was badly received, but I think people were I remember just at the time people think, oh, this is a bit lightweight.
Yeah,
because it wasn't Paranoid, and it wasn't, because it wasn't all angular, and also because of the elements of funk that were starting to come into it, and kind of African music that was
all the polyrhythms,
and yet some of the melodies are were naive melodies, they were really, really simple things, but it didn't make them any less moving or complex, it was, and that bravery to say, no, this is it, this is the beat for the entire song. And it will work, and and it does.
It does. I heard. I don't know if it's true. I assume it is, but I heard the story of how they came up with that is that they all swapped instruments. So maybe David Byrne was like on the Juno or the synth or whatever it was, and Tina Weymouth on guitar, and Jerry Harrison on drums, and Chris on the bass, something like that. Mm-hmm. And they all swapped around, and that's where the simplicity came from. It was still very much the personality of the four. Like we were talking about how important it's not just David Byrne, and I strongly agree with you there, because I think like it's so important what Jerry brought to that band, because he came from Modern Lovers, and so he kind of came from that like late 70s post-punk thing, even before Talking Heads. Yeah, it's truly a great band. When you talk about like the great American bands, from Talking Heads, right up there for me, no doubt about it.
Oh yeah. I saw this tour in Forest Hills in 1983. So I was doing my J1 in the States, and a guy I knew called me and he said, I have an extra ticket for Talking Heads. And I said, oh, that's great. Sure, I'll just go along to that. As you do,
God.
18, you're going, I go to another gig in New York,
Oh my
and
goodness.
Of course, and I was expecting, because it was when it was, I knew they were touring, I knew the album. But, obviously pre-internet, so you had no sort of sense as to what to anticipate. So we went into Forest Hills, and there's a bare stage, and you're kind of thinking, oh, Jesus, they won't be on stage for hours. There's nothing on the stage. And then David Byrne walks out, and the gig starts, and you're thinking, all right, I've never seen anything like this before or heard it, and they were astonishing band,
That's an incredible flex. I can't believe you just dropped that on me. Unbelievable. It's unbelievable.
It's an age thing. That's all it is.
No, it's incredible. I'm unbelievably jealous. That sounds incredible.
But just as I said, the great thing about it was not really knowing anything about it, other than I liked the band, I liked the album, but I didn't know anything about the tour. So we're just kind of literally walking into this place going, oh yeah, Forest Hills, So we're going to jump up a little bit to 2003, and we'll move away from love songs to let's just go straight to Lust.
Yeah. Why not?
Exactly. So this is Stacy's Mom by Fountains of Wayne.
It absolutely is.
Is it the greatest Cars song that Cars never recorded?
Well, it's funny you should say that. I listen. People are probably wondering, like, how is this guy gone from the Beatles to Dionne Warwick talking about Burt Bacharach, and now we're talking about Fountains of Wayne? I've loads of reasons to include this one, to the point where I thought it would be kind of rude not to. Yeah. First of all, I wanted to include a song that would represent a time of my life that the more I look back on it, I realize how influential it was. that was like, I was born in 95. So when all these like music channels like MTV Rocks and NME TV and all them, and Kerrang and Q, when all them were like on TV, they were hugely influential into me, like, again, learning instruments, falling in love with music, different types of music. And I remember so clearly like being in my neighbor's house in like 2002, 2003, 2004, and just like Hey Yeah was on the music channels, the music video, Crazy in Love by Beyonce. Lots of Busted. I loved Busted back then. Remember them? Green Day, American Idiot was like starting to blow up. But the one I want to pick that is most unique and most personal to me is Stacy's Mom. It's quite unique in that when you think back on that period of music, there was lots of strange things going on. There was like nu metal was kind of big, and it was a bit dodgy, and Eminem was on the TV a lot. And then there was lots of like super cool stuff coming out of like New York, like Interpol and Yeah Yeahs and all that. And there was lots of kind of like pop punk as well that hasn't aged well. You remember all that like Bowling for Soup stuff. And then came along this band out in New York that were like the polar opposite of cool. And they were like power pop. And I've since gone on to like really, really love bands like The Cars, Cheap Trick, Big Star. I love power pop. And this was definitely like, this was the moment that radicalized me into being a power pop fan for sure. And I love Stacy's Mom. I think it's like an absolutely perfect power pop song. And yeah, the video was hilarious. I think it was like a Fast Times at Richmond High thing. It was just like I remember it so well. I remember like waiting around for it to come on TV, and I absolutely love it to bits. I still love it to bits. And another reason I wanted to include it was because the man who wrote the song, the bass player in Fountains Away, Adam Schlesinger, he died tragically kind of last year from complications due to COVID. And I was lucky enough to meet him a couple of times. When we were looking for producers for our first album, we were kind of meeting lots of people, and a guy called Tim Pagnotta from a band called Sugar Cult ended up producing it. But we met Adam, and he was extremely generous with his time and his advice, and we did a few sessions with him. And he was just one of the good guys. And anyone who knows anything about him knows he was extremely talented. He was nominated for every award under the sun, Oscars, Grammys, you name it, Emmys. It really is a tragedy that he was lost so young. And just one of the good guys. And I suppose long live Fountains of Wayne and long live Power Pop.
And I think it's interesting because it's like when you put it in context of the time of, you know, what else was going on. And I think what's interesting, I suppose, about it is it's such an American sound. I think this power pop stuff, and you're right. I think when you pick The Cars and Cheap Trick, but particularly Big Star, I think you can see this. You know, let's not be afraid of writing a pop song, but it can also be really clever and really melodic. And then it's just a really, really good pop song as well, you know?
Do you know what it is? It's kind of like they were all them bands, and you can include like whatever Rick Springfield and Joe Jackson and all that stuff in as well. Yeah. It's like they were unbelievably influenced by the British invasion and by kind of like the cleverness of the Kinks and the Beatles and stuff. Yeah. But they turned it into this like pure America. You know, it's like that Northern American sound, but it's very clearly influenced by like the cleverness of the British invasion.
And, you know, these things sound like they should all be with videos of, convertibles driving down freeways or into the sunset, because you think it works perfectly. You know, these are just, it's almost a bit, I suppose, like what you're talking about, the Hal David and Burt Bacharach stuff, where they're insanely hummable tunes. Mm-hmm. And, you know, they're like earworms in the best sense, because you think, that's a great start to a track. You think there's a really, really cool start to a track. Oh, now what's he done? That's also really cool. Oh, look what he's done with the chorus. Now, who'd have thought of doing that? Because that works really brilliantly. It's a deceptively complicated art, writing
it absolutely
a
is.
Simple pop song, you know?
Yeah, look, you know, like a lot of people would say that The Academic are a pop band, and I'm not going to refute that. I've always, as you can tell from my choices, I love pop music. I'm very passionate about it. So yeah, a band like this, I really like Fountains of Wayne. I think they're quite underrated. Again, I think the uniqueness of them coming out at that time, surrounded by like new metal and kind of new hip hop and like then like all the Strokes and the kind of cooler indie stuff. They were a really unique band. They were like this little kind of very pure, very innocent, very unashamedly, we are who we are.
Yeah.
Power pop band at the time, and
fun,
fun. It's fun, extremely fun,
but great musicians as well, and put an awful lot of thought into something, as I said,
completely. And from like working with Adam and stuff, like he really was. He was an incredible, again, composer. It felt like all his pop songs were compositions, and like do you remember the movie That Thing You Do, with Tom Hanks? Like, so Adam's challenge for that movie was to write a pop song that sounded like it could have been a number one in 1963 or whatever.
Yeah.
And the way he crafted that song that sounds completely believable as it could have been a one-hit wonder in 1962. Like to be able to, like, not imitate, but to be able to write in that mindset. It's an incredible achievement.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it just shows. I mean, I suppose he was just completely immersed in the music, and it had seeped into every bit of him, I think. So, and and I think you're right. Like that it's a very warm film, but it's a really warm song as well.
Oh yeah,
that you kind of think that's a great song, and almost at the same time go, yeah, but they're not going anywhere.
yeah, exactly. That's what's so incredible
about it.
That's
what it had to be. It had to.
Yeah, it had to sound like a band who was a one-hit wonder in a specific time, a specific place, in a specific. Oh, it's incredible. I don't know how he did it. It's amazing.
And I think sometimes it gets overlooked, I think, in music, and sometimes is when you do get those kind of one-hit wonders, and sometimes, that's it. You don't have to be the Rolling Stones and go on for 9,000 years or whatever.
One of my favorite recordings of all time, and my karaoke song, I'll have you know, is "Video Killed the Radio Star" by the Buggles. And to the best of my knowledge, the Buggles didn't have any other like big hits anyway.
No.
And I would die for that recording. I think it's brilliant, and I love that song.
Yeah. Right. Well, listen, we're nearing the end, so I was thinking we might take these last two together, because again, it's a shift in kind of what we've been talking about.
Sure.
But also, I think one of the things that sometimes when people send me their list, what I try and do is I have a look at them. I kind of think, is there any way to kind of group these, or does it make sense to put things together? And obviously, this is the way you sent it, but your last two choices are Kate Bush and Julee Cruise, and I think they have such unique voices.
Completely.
And they work in a sound space that is instantly recognizable. So I just thought, we talked about them separately, but I think it's interesting that you've picked, these two particular artists who have a particular sound and have kind of carved out a space for themselves, particularly, say, Kate Bush, that is entirely self-directed. She just seems to do what she wants to do when she wants to do it. And the same Julee Cruise just seemed to pop out of nowhere. But we'll talk a little bit about it. So you've picked Hounds of Love as the Kate Bush track from the Hounds of Love album.
Yeah.
So this was released in 1985. NME, when they reviewed it, they reckoned it was the best album of the year. And she had taken 2 or 3 years, I think, to make this album. But why this one, Stephen?
Well, first of all, completely agree. That album, especially the side A of that album, is just maybe one of the best side A's. It was Running Up That Hill, Into Hounds of Love, Cloud Busting's definitely in there, and there
was 5 tracks on the first
Big Sky.
side.
Yeah,
and 4 of them were hit singles.
Yeah, unbelievable. But I have to be completely honest about how I first came across this song. And it was when, again, I was a teenager and I first heard the Futureheads cover of Hounds of Love. I don't know if you remember that, but it was, I suppose, like a mini hit for them.
Yeah.
They were a band from the north of England. And I just remember loving the lyrics. I remember and the intro, and I remember thinking oh, I love the lyric, found a fox caught by dogs, that whole verse. And just they're these really evocative, beautiful lyrics. And then I think I might have heard it in a video game, like a sports video game or something like that, or through the music video. And then again, it was my older brother, Matthew, who's the guitar player in the band. He was like, I'm pretty sure that's a cover of an old song. Yeah. And I was like, are you sure? Are you sure that's not just the Futureheads? And lo and behold, YouTube. And I go on and I start listening to Hounds of Love, the original. And like you said, there are only a handful of times in my entire life where I've heard something musically and thought, well, I've never heard anything like this before, ever. Like the first time, maybe like Roy Orbison or like Karen Carpenter, Bjork, just something that seems truly unique. And when Hounds of Love started and the sample from that old English horror movie, I can't remember which one, but it's coming, it's in the trees, that I was like, every so often you just like strike a relationship with a piece of art that is like intimate, and you know that it's like, oh, this is for me. You've found who you were looking to find when you release this music. This is absolutely for me. And that's kind of how I feel about Hounds of Love. As an album, especially the A side, I'm not like massively familiar with the back end of that, the kind of weirder side. But I love Kate Bush. I love her lyrics. I love especially Hounds of Love, that whole thing of like being chased by, however you want to interpret that. I've like a lot of our music as the academic is kind of based around that idea of like the loss of innocence from the end of your teenage years and transitioning into like being an adult. And I've always thought that that's kind of what Kate Bush was maybe talking about with being chased by the Hounds of Love, or it's probably more obviously about love, but that's just art. You take away from it what you bring to it. And that's what I did. I love Kate Bush.
Yeah, such an astonishing album in lots of ways, because on side A there's 5 tracks, 4 of them were hit singles, and then on side B is just a sweet.
It's weird.
And you kind of think, I'm sure at some point she probably, the record company were going, oh, another hit single. Okay, let's turn it over. Okay, where's the song?
Yeah. So, and then it's
Kate,
like,
can you not just write another single? And she obviously is going, no, this is it. This is what we're releasing.
That's the thing. It feels like very two distinct sides. Like I think that even the A side she refers to as Hounds of Love, and then the B side is that one about her being on a boat or whatever it is. It's the kind of the vibier end of it. Yeah. But like truly like an artist who never compromised for anyone or anything.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting, like when you mentioned Bjork, the same sort of way, obviously as soon as you hear Bjork, you go, it's such a distinct, it's not, and again, it's not just her voice, but it's that approach. It's just whatever the vision is, and the vision as much as possible, I guess that's what, she was trying to realize. And Bjork does the same, I suppose. And I think that's one of the great things about, the Hounds of Love, is that it's this fabulous mix of really, really cool melodies and then oddity. And I'm funny enough, because we did Hounds of Love was picked by someone else a few weeks ago in one of these things that we were doing, and really? I hadn't listened to it in a long time. We just didn't listen to it. And the thing that I couldn't get over is it's only 3 minutes long. And in my memory, it was at least 10 minutes long, even though I knew it couldn't be, because it was a single and all those things. I was kind of thinking, geez, she squeezed so much into 3 minutes.
Yeah. So many incredible parts to that song. Yeah. To the point where the structure is actually tricky when you're listening back to it. You're like, what's she gonna say next? Oh, that part. Yeah. I also love the music video. I hadn't seen it in ages, and then kind of in preparation for doing this, I looked at it again, and it's brilliant. Apparently it's inspired by, is it 39 Steps, the Hitchcock movie, and just and
she's so cool in it, and with her hair cut short, I think again, every 20 to 25-year-old man and woman I knew at the time just fell instantly in love with her again.
It was, I'm sure it was impossible not to. It, as a visual artist as well, like in her artwork, in her videos, also in like just how incredible looking she was. Yeah. I'm sure she was hugely inspirational to generations.
And again, I think that, her ability musically as well, and not just in terms of, like, I think it was that notion of vision. She had a Fairlight, I think, apparently at the start of this. So she was demoing stuff and then starting to work with musicians. But she was she was saying, no, I need the kind of sound that's a bodhrán. So I'll get a bodhrán player in, and then I need something else in. So she obviously had it's not even that she had, I don't know if she had the clear idea in her head right away, but one thing I always liked about this is just how audacious she was to follow that, to go, no, this is what I'm after this sound. And if it means, mixing this type of sound with this type of sound and underplaying it with some keyboards, that's it. That's what I'm going for,
But all them singles off Hounds of Love, like that's a good point. They are very strange recordings. Like there's no doubt about it. Hounds of Love is weird. There's no particular...
it's driven by the drums.
Yeah, the way the drums like pan, and the way it's not really like a particularly solid beat. There's lots of space, and even like when you get running up that hill is like obviously one of the best pop songs ever. But it's like there's a strange textures in it where it doesn't feel particularly grounded. It feels very kind of floaty, Yeah, but that just adds to the mystique of the album.
And talking about floaty and something that's not quite ground, that's not stuck on the ground. Your final choice is Julee Cruise. It's Falling, and it's from the album Floating into the Night.
Mm-hmm.
So, Julee Cruise with Angelo Badalamenti and David Lynch lurking in the background.
Oh yeah.
So why this one then?
This is kind of the opposite to the Bacharach thing that I was talking about earlier when I said I have no idea when some of them songs came to me. I can tell you exactly when this song came to me.
Okay.
It was my Leaving Cert year and I was doing my mock exams and I was kind of... I knew I wasn't going to go to college. I knew I wanted to play with the band and that we were starting to get like busy and kind of, I suppose, like reasonably successful at the time. And so naturally enough, I'm like 18 years old. I'm like in this band. We have a song on the radio. We're doing fun gigs up and down the country. To say I was like disillusioned with the leaving certificate is an understatement. I was, I believe the technical term is dossing. I was absolutely dossing. And I was just, yeah, you know, like when you're that age, you want to like listen to and watch as many new things and experience new things as you can. And I'd seen one David Lynch thing before. I'd seen Mulholland Drive when I was about 16, I'd say. I read an article in Rolling Stone online where they were talking about their film critics were picking their favorite films of like the decade, something like that, one of them lists. And I watched Mulholland Drive, and obviously it went over my head, but I kind of liked it, but I couldn't pinpoint why. And then during my Leaving Cert mocks, I started watching Twin Peaks. And like, as soon as that first note hits the dum-dum, for me, that is like euphoria. I just feel at home. I feel peace. It came at a point in my life where, you know, like it's like an influential part of your life when you're like 17, 18 and stuff. And just, I started watching this TV show. I liked how it looked. I liked how the characters spoke. I liked how they carried themselves. I liked everything about it, and I couldn't explain why. And I've been a massive Twin Peaks fan to this day. And that Julee Cruise song, obviously, it's the music from Badalamenti and the lyrics are from David Lynch. It's just been incredibly influential in my life. To say I'm a super fan of the TV show would be an understatement. I do think the greatest day of my life was when I was outside Seattle in the diner. I went to Snoqualmie Falls. I was at the Great Northern Hotel. I was in the Double R Diner. You name it, I did it. I did, and to this day, I do think it was the single greatest day of my life. And again, kind of what I was talking about earlier is all my favorite pieces of art are very evocative and have this very signature sense of place and time, and that is Twin Peaks. You feel like it's a real place where you can live, and the characters. And I love Julee Cruise in it, and I love that song. I love how the instrumental is the theme song. But Julee Cruise is in the second season in an episode called Lonely Souls, and without spoiling, obviously, the television show for anyone, there's this incredible scene where she's in the Roadhouse and she's performing Rockin' Back Inside My Heart. And then it kind of transitions to, what's that other song? The World Spins, I think. And it's tough not to... There's something very kind of strange is revealed in the show. And it's the most incredible scene. There's like an apparition to Dale Cooper. The giant tells him it is happening again without spoiling it. And just everyone knows without knowing how they know. And Julee Cruise is singing, and Bobby Briggs is looking very stressed. Donna Hayward starts to uncontrollably cry. Dale Cooper looks like he's heartbroken. The log lady is there. And it's just so strange and so emotional. And I will never forget seeing it for the first time. And just Julee Cruise singing on that stage. I could sit here and ramble about Twin Peaks and David Lynch for like another hour but I don't think anyone wants to hear that. But I love Falling as a song. I love Julee Cruise. I think her voice perfectly complements the kind of worlds that David Lynch kind of brings to the screen.
Yeah, and I think because he started working with Badalamenti on Blue Velvet.
Blue Velvet, yeah.
And apparently what they were trying to do was they were trying to get the rights to Song of the Sirens, but this Mortal Coils version, and they couldn't afford it, because of whatever the way the rights, because it was Tim Buckley's song as well. So I think it was a very expensive thing to get. So Lynch said, well, can we do something like that? And Badalamenti had worked with Julee Cruise before in some sort of theatre workshop and said, this woman I heard singing once had this, odd ethereal voice. And I think then, they put it together, and you think you're right. I think part of this is it's a combination of a lot of things. It's the combination of the three of them. It's not just that it's the music, but it's her voice, which is so unhurried.
Yeah.
And at the start of the song, which is lovely, it's this gorgeous melody, and then it just shifts a little bit to make it slightly less sweet. And then it goes back to it. But it's just so unhurried. The music is unhurried and the lyric is unhurried. And I suppose, well, going back to Twin Peaks is unhurried.
Absolutely. That's an understatement.
There's reveals or not reveals. And you think, was something revealed or not? And you think, well, it doesn't really matter,
Yeah.
Because it just slowly rolls and rolls along, just drags you along with it,
It's a beautiful collaboration between the three of them. I love Badalamenti as a composer. I love his stuff for Lost Highway and Blue Velvet, and the Fire Walk with Me soundtrack is it's unbelievably good. It's too good, and his incredible music mixed with her voice, and then you can tell they're David Lynch's words when it's all about it's like when it's like this dreamscape, and it's incredibly simple, and it's the simplicity in which only he can make that kind of pure. And it's nearly like this childlike wonder.
Yeah.
I love Julee Cruise again. Is just so interesting to watch as a performer as well. The way she looks, the way she carries herself, the way she moves. It's very ethereal, very mysterious, and I like that. When I say like that is one of my comfort songs. Like when them first notes begin to play. I literally I transcend. I'm gone.
Yeah. Listen, there's a great place to finish, Stephen. And thank you so much for doing this. It's been a real blast. I really, really enjoyed it. And I think we could definitely invite you back, and you could do the special shows. I think just focusing on a particular artist or a suite of songs, maybe. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me on. It's been lovely to talk through these songs. I think I've even learned more about why I like them by talking through them. And it's just been really nice. Thank you very much.
Cool. Listen, thanks so much. And everyone out there, thanks for listening to Vinyl Hours with Stephen Murtagh on the First Thought podcast. Galway International Arts Festival would like to acknowledge the support of its principal funding agencies, the Arts Council and Fáilte Ireland, Galway 2020 European Capital Culture, education partner NUI Galway, Festival energy partner Flowgas, and drinks partner Heineken. For more from Galway International Arts Festival, see giaf.ie. I'm Tiernan Henry. See you next time.